Extreme wide shot of the frozen Ardennes landscape, a solitary hill in the center. In the brutal calculus of war, a single piece of ground can become the fulcrum upon which an entire battle turns. A nameless hill, a wooded ridge, a barren knoll, its strategic value measured in yards and sightlines. And sometimes the defense of that ground falls not to a company or a platoon, but to one man. One wounded, isolated soldier against a gathering storm of enemy forces. How long could he possibly hold? What drives a man to fight when all hope of survival seems lost? Close-up of a battered, snow-covered M1 helmet with a bullet hole. This is not a myth. This is not legend. This is the story of a last stand forged in the frozen hell of the Western Front in December of 1944. A story of sheer, unimaginable will. The story of when one wounded soldier held a hill for 72 hours. This was his last stand. Low-angle hero shot of a lone soldier against a bleak winter sky. The location: the dense, snow-laden forests of the Ardennes, near the small Belgian town of Krinkelt. The date: December 17th. The larger story is well known, the opening thrust of Hitler's desperate gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. German panzer divisions, spearheaded by the elite 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, were punching through American lines, aiming for the Meuse River and beyond. Weary American GIs of the 99th Division disembarking in a snowy village. In their path stood the weary green troops of the 99th Infantry Division, the Battle Babies. Among them was Private First Class James "Jimmy" Holloway, a 19-year-old rifleman from Ohio, assigned to Company L, 3rd Battalion, 394th Infantry Regiment. The 99th was spread thin, holding a frontage far beyond normal doctrine. Their positions were a series of outposts and strong points in the rugged, wooded terrain. For Jimmy Holloway and his squad, their world was a hastily dug foxhole on a prominent tree-covered rise designated simply as Hill 400A on their maps. It was not a mighty fortress. It was a frozen patch of dirt and roots, offering a crucial observation point over a key network of fire breaks and logging trails, avenues of approach for any German advance. Their orders were simple and final. Hold this position at all costs. Delay the enemy. Give the battalion time to consolidate its main line of resistance. The strategic situation was dire. By the dawn of the 17th, reports of broken units, infiltrating Germans, and rolling panzers were flooding in. Fear, thick and cold as the morning fog, gripped the men. They could hear the distant thunder of artillery moving closer. They were on the cutting edge of a crumbling front. And for Jimmy Holloway, the war was about to shrink from a global conflict to a personal battle for a few square feet of frozen earth. The first contact came at 0830 hours. Not a massed assault, but probing attacks. Shadows flitting between the giant fir trees. The rattle of a German MG-42 machine gun, its rate of fire unmistakable. A sound GIs called Hitler's buzzsaw. Holloway's squad, 12 men in total, returned fire. They repelled that first probe, but the cost was immediate. 2 men were hit, one seriously. Their squad leader, Sergeant Miller, tried to raise Company HQ on the field phone. The line was dead. Cut. They were on their own. By noon, the pressure intensified. A full German platoon, roughly 40 men of the 12th SS Reconnaissance Battalion, began to maneuver against Hill 400A. They were battle-hardened, clad in white winter camouflage smocks over their field gray. They moved with a professional lethality. Mortar rounds began to walk up the slope, whump, 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 showering the defenders with frozen dirt and shrapnel. The concussion was deafening. Holloway felt the first wound just after 1,300 hours. A sniper's bullet, fired from a range of over 300 yards, struck the edge of his foxhole and sent a wooden splinter tearing into his left thigh. It was a deep, burning gash. A medic in the squad, Private Jenkins, crawled over, stuffed sulfa powder into the wound, and tied a tight bandage. "You're lucky, Jimmy," Jenkins whispered, before a mortar blast fragment caught him in the neck. Jenkins died silently within seconds. The squad's cohesion was fraying. By 1600 hours, as the early winter darkness began to seep into the forest, only 5 men were still effective fighters. They were low on ammunition. Their water was frozen. The temperature was plummeting. Then, at dusk, the main assault came. A company-strength attack. Over 100 SS grenadiers, using the cover of the gloom and the trees. The sound was overwhelming. The shrieks of enemy whistles, guttural shouts in German, the crashing of boots through underbrush, and the all-encompassing roar of automatic weapons fire. In the vicious, close-quarter fighting that followed, Holloway's world dissolved into muzzle flashes and silhouettes. He saw Sergeant Miller bayonet a German soldier before being cut down by a burst from a submachine gun. He saw another friend, Corporal Evans, try to throw a grenade only to be hit by multiple rounds, the grenade falling uselessly at his feet. The defense was collapsing. By 1900 hours, under a cloak of complete darkness, it was over. Of the original 12, only Holloway remained alive on the hill. The others were dead, dying, or had been captured in the final melee. He was alone, wounded, surrounded. The Germans, believing the position neutralized, consolidated below the crest, using the captured American foxholes for their own perimeter. They had taken the hill, or so they thought. Little did they know that one defiant American, bleeding and shivering in a shell crater near the summit, was not yet done. Alone. The word carries a terrifying weight on a battlefield. For Jimmy Holloway, curled in a crater half filled with icy slush, it was his new reality. The pain in his leg was a constant throbbing fire. His uniform was stiff with frozen blood and sweat. His inventory was pitiful. 1 M1 Garand rifle, 2 remaining 8-round en-bloc clips, a single fragmentation grenade. His canteen empty. No food, no medical supplies beyond the crusted bandage on his leg. Around him, he could hear the sounds of the enemy, guttural conversations, the clink of mess tins, laughter. The Germans were so close, 30, maybe 40 yards down the slope. They had lit small shielded fires. He could smell their cigarette smoke and the faint, greasy scent of their field rations. The cold was an enemy in itself, a creeping numbness that threatened to shut down his mind and body. To sleep was to die. To move was to risk detection. Dawn on December 18th brought a grim clarity. From his hide, Holloway could see the entire landscape of his prison. The crisis of survival began. His first priority, water. Using his helmet, he painfully gathered snow, letting it melt against his body in the feeble daylight. It was an agonizingly slow process. Hunger gnawed at his belly, a sharp, hollow pain. He saw the German positions dotting the hillside below. He saw a squad setting up an MG-42 with a clear field of fire down the trail his company might use for a counterattack. He saw enemy officers studying maps. He was behind enemy lines in the heart of their forward position. Escape was impossible. Surrender was a thought he batted away. He thought of Jenkins, of Miller, of Evans. He would not make it easy for them. But more immediate was the threat of discovery. A German patrol, 2 men, decided to scout the very crest of the hill that morning. Holloway lay perfectly still, his face in the frozen mud, as their boots crunched past his crater, close enough to touch. He held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. They passed by. But the isolation was playing tricks on his mind. The wind sounded like whispers. The creaking of snow-laden branches sounded like approaching footsteps. The mental strain was as debilitating as his physical wounds. He was a ghost on a hill he was ordered to hold. And hold it he did, in the only way he now could, by observing. He became a silent witness to the German force below, noting their numbers, their weapon placements, their routines. Pause. On the second night, the 18th into the 19th, the true test of his spirit came. A freezing rain began to fall, soaking him to the bone. The shivers became uncontrollable spasms. The wound on his leg, untreated, began to pulse with a sickening heat, the first sign of infection. Despair, a cold, black wave, washed over him. What was the point? No one was coming. No one knew he was alive. The wound on his leg, his death here would be meaningless, a footnote in a lost battle on a forgotten hill. He almost laid his head down, ready to let the cold take him. But then he saw it, a flicker of light to the west, American artillery far in the distance shelling some other target. It was a sign. The army was still out there, still fighting, and he was still a soldier. He tightened his grip on the M1 Garand. He would hold. The morning of December 19th, Holloway's third day on the hill, began with the roar of engines. Peering through a screen of broken branches, he saw the reason for the German presence below. 2 Kubelwagen field cars and a small convoy of trucks had arrived. An officers' conference was taking place. This was clearly a forward command post for the attacking SS battalion. The strategic value of Hill 400A was now horrifyingly clear to him. From here, the Germans were directing the assault on the 99th Division's main line. He wasn't just on a hill. He was in the brain of the local enemy operation. A new, terrifying purpose filled him. It was no longer just about survival or even holding ground. It was about striking back. But how? One man, with 16 rounds and one grenade, against a headquarters element of at least 50 enemy troops. A direct assault was suicide. He needed to be a weapon of chaos. He needed to make them believe they were under attack by a much larger force. His plan formed with a cold, sharp clarity. It hinged on the element of surprise, the German's own discipline and his intimate knowledge of the hill's topography. He waited for the perfect moment, when the officers were gathered around a map on the hood of a Kübelwagen, and when the morning patrol had just returned and was relaxed, brewing coffee. Holloway took his single grenade. He pulled the pin but kept the spoon safely clamped in his hand. With agonizing slowness, he began a wide, crawling flanking maneuver. Using a shallow drainage ditch he'd spotted days before, he moved down the hill, not up, circumnavigating the main German perimeter. The pain in his leg was excruciating, a white-hot agony with every movement. It took him over 2 hours to crawl 200 yards. Pause. He found his spot, a thick cluster of evergreen shrubs, directly downwind and slightly elevated above the German motor pool. He could see the backs of the officers, not 75 yards away. This was it. He took a deep, steadying breath. The moment stretched, silent but for the murmur of enemy voices. First, he threw the grenade. Not at the officers, but in a high, arcing lob toward the parked trucks and the cluster of mortar tubes he'd identified. As soon as it left his hand, he scrambled back 10 feet, raised his M1 Garand, and did what would seem insane. He opened fire, but not at the mass of soldiers. He aimed for the Kübelwagen's fuel tank and then at the radio antenna on the command truck. Crack, crack, crack. The grenade exploded with a satisfying crump among the trucks, followed by the secondary whoosh of gasoline igniting. Panic erupted. German soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting, firing wildly into the woods in the direction of the grenade's origin. But Holloway's rifle shots were coming from a different azimuth. In the confusion, the SS troops believed they were being hit by a coordinated attack from at least 2 directions. A pincer movement. Officers yelled contradictory orders. A machine gun team, in a panic, began firing across their own perimeter at suspected enemy positions, sowing further discord. Holloway, his initial shots fired, immediately ceased fire. He became a ghost again. He rolled into a depression, his body screaming in protest, and lay perfectly still as German fire tore through the trees above him. He heard the revving of engines, shouted commands to pull back to the tree line, and the frantic sounds of a headquarters pack-up under fire. His ruse had worked. He had created the illusion of an assault. To the Germans, their secure command post was now compromised and under direct attack. They made the tactical decision to displace. For the next hour, Holloway listened to the sounds of the enemy withdrawing from his hill. It was a slow, cautious retreat, covered by machine gun fire, but a retreat nonetheless. By 1500 hours on December 19th, a profound silence settled over Hill 400A. Smoke from the burning truck curled into the gray sky, but the enemy was gone. Through sheer guts, cunning, and an act of breathtaking audacity, Private First Class James Holloway had not just held the hill, he had retaken it single-handedly. Jimmy Holloway would remain on that hill for another 6 hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, his body finally succumbing to exhaustion, blood loss, and hypothermia. He was found at 2100 hours by a patrol from the 394th Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon, who were cautiously re-entering the area after the local German advance had stalled. They found a scene of battle, enemy equipment, a burned-out vehicle, and one barely alive American soldier curled in a hole at the summit, his frozen hands still locked around his rifle. The aftermath was one of stunned disbelief. Debriefed in a field hospital, Holloway's disjointed account was initially met with skepticism, but it was corroborated by captured enemy maps and prisoner interrogations. The German battalion's war diary for that sector, captured later, noted a heavy and skillful enemy counterattack on our forward command post at grid reference 400A, causing significant disruption to our timetable. James Holloway's wounds were severe. The infected leg required multiple surgeries. He spent the rest of the war recovering. But his actions on Hill 400A had a tangible military impact. His initial defense with his squad had delayed the German Recon Battalion's advance for a critical half-day. His subsequent solo presence and his final devastating harassment caused a further costly delay of nearly a full day as the enemy regrouped and relocated its command element. In the fragile balance of the Battle of the Bulge's opening phase, where hours mattered, Holloway's 72-hour stand bought his regiment precious time to shore up its defenses. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Private First Class James Holloway was awarded the Medal of Honor. His extraordinary heroism and steadfast devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. He returned to Ohio after the war, a humble man who rarely spoke of his 3 days on that hill. He passed away in 1978, but his last stand stands as a timeless testament to the impact one soldier, pushed beyond all human limits, can have on the tide of history. It is a story of the human spirit's refusal to be broken. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Stories of unimaginable courage in the face of impossible odds, hidden in the fog of war and the passage of time. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.